This will be a review of two movies, Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein, which is its sequel. I'm choosing to do both movies together because they have a lot to teach writers about writing books in series or writing a sequel. Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein were both produced by Carl Laemmle Jr., whose father, Carl Sr., founded and ran Universal Pictures. Apologies if I murdered his name. Both movies were directed by James Whale. So, just a bit about the book before I get to the movies. I want to talk about the book Frankenstein versus the movie. I read Frankenstein in my Gothic literature study course as one of my 10 books. I just watched this earliest version of the movie Frankenstein from 1931 and The Bride from 1935 2 weeks ago. Right off the bat, the screenplay was completely different from the book. I still find it surprising that a producer options a book, calls the movie the same name, and then changes it so it's almost unrecognizable. So just so you know, the book and the movie are very different. The Frankenstein movie was adapted from a play that was written by Peggy Webling, which was based on Mary Shelley's original 1818 novel. The Webling play was adapted by John L. Balderston, and the screenplay for the 1931 movie was written by Francis Edward Farago and Garrett Fort, with uncredited contributions by Robert Florey and John Russell. The story of The Bride of Frankenstein was the brainchild of William Hurlbut and John Balderston. The Bride's screenplay was written by William Hurlbut. So there were different interpretations going on before they even got a workable screenplay for the first movie. So I'll start with a short summary without spoilers just to set the scene. Starting with the first movie, Frankenstein. Although the scientist's name in Mary Shelley's book is Victor Frankenstein, in the movie, the obsessed scientist is named Henry Frankenstein. In a Bavarian village, Henry Frankenstein and his hunchback assistant Fritz are working together on Henry's secret experiment of stitching a human body together from body parts of men that were recently hanged or bodies that were recently dug up from burial sites. At a school nearby, Dr. Waldman, Henry Frankenstein's mentor, is lecturing to a class of medical students about the human brain. He shows the class two brains. One brain specimen is that of a normal man, and the other one is that of a violent man. Each brain is in its own jar, and the doctor is pointing out the differences. Dr. Frankenstein hears about this experiment and sends Fritz there at night to steal the healthy normal brain for his creature. Fritz breaks in and finds the brains, but something happens where he takes the violent man's brain and brings it back to his boss without letting the doctor know about the switch. Dr. Frankenstein is engaged to a woman named Elizabeth. She speaks to her fiance's friend named Victor about the scientist's peculiar behavior, in particular, his seclusion and his secretiveness. Victor and Elizabeth decide to go and consult with Dr. Waldman, who was the mentor of her fiancé, to help them understand Henry's actions. Waldman reveals to them that he knows Henry is obsessed with creating life. So they all go to the laboratory as they are concerned about what he is doing. They arrive just when Dr. Frankenstein is making his final preparations to breathe life into the new creature. That's all I'll tell you about the first movie, so as not to ruin it for anyone who hasn't seen it. This is a classic Gothic movie, and it has everything Gothic movie lovers want. Great sets, spooky Gothic atmosphere, an angry crowd with torches, intrigue, suspense, and the appearance of the monster that we know as Frankenstein. So this movie has also aged very well. Now let's go to The Bride of Frankenstein. In a beautiful romantic room in a Gothic castle, Percy Shelley and Lord Byron praise Mary Shelley for her story of Frankenstein and his monster. She reminds them that the reason for her writing this story was to impart a moral tale, the consequences of a mortal man playing God. She also indicates that she has more to tell about this story. Then the movie shifts to the last scene in the Frankenstein movie, where the angry villagers are all around the burning windmill tower where the laboratory was located, and they are cheering the death of the monster. Hans, the father of the girl who Frankenstein victimized, insists on seeing the monster's bones to know that he is truly dead. He tries to enter what's left of the tower, but he falls into a pit underneath the burning mill where the monster, having survived the fire, strangles and kills him. The man's wife is calling to her husband to come back, and she remains at the top, worrying and waiting for her husband. The monster climbs out of the tower, and he throws her into the burning pit too. As he escapes the tower fire, he runs into Dr. Frankenstein's servant named Minnie, who runs away at seeing him. In the meantime, the crowd brings back Dr. Frankenstein's body on a stretcher covered with a white sheet to his castle. Everyone assumes he is dead from the accident and the fire in the windmill. As they arrive, Minnie runs ahead of them and tells them all that the monster is not dead, but the crowd ignores her and dismisses her as crazy. Dr. Frankenstein, still lying on the stretcher and covered like a dead body, moves his hand, and Elizabeth realizes he is alive. She nurses him back to health, and during this recovery period, she works on him. And Dr. Frankenstein has renounced his creation many times, but he suddenly announces that he may still be destined to unlock the secret of life and immortality. Well, Elizabeth is horrified by this revelation, and she cries and tells him she foresees his death in this. At that point, Dr. Frankenstein seems to regain his position of letting go of his experiment. He smooths down her feathers, and all seems well again. However, Dr. Pretorius, a new character in the sequel, comes for a reluctant Dr. Frankenstein and manages to coax him into just coming to see his creations of life. At first, Dr. Frankenstein is reluctant because of his promises to Elizabeth. But during this process of going to see Dr. Pretorius's experiments, Pretorius manages to talk Frankenstein into joining forces with him in another experiment. Frankenstein is torn between wanting to marry Elizabeth and live happily ever after, but his inner desire to create life takes over again, and it makes him agree to go forward with Dr. Pretorius. So Dr. Pretorius is a bigger-than-life persona who you have to see and watch to even believe. He is a Charles Dickens-like character that only Hollywood, with a twist of British storytelling, could create. Dr. Pretorius reveals his discoveries to Dr. Frankenstein, and he also tells Dr. Frankenstein that he wants to create a mate for the monster. Dr. Pretorius says he can grow an artificial brain while Henry gathers body parts for Frankenstein's mate. And that's all I'll reveal of the second movie. Now, who to watch as writers? The first one is the monster. The monster's costume was a collaboration between the famous makeup artist Jack Pierce, the director James Whale, and actor Boris Karloff. And in my humble opinion, to this day, no one has bested this costuming, and I don't believe anyone will. Now, this could be my age talking now. Many years and many technologies have come along, but no one has bested this iconic Frankenstein monster. Now, writers need to pay specific attention to how Boris Karloff acts with his eyes alone at times, and other times a combination of his eyes and awkward body movements bring this character to life. He is amazing. So think about how to describe these emotions and movements in words. The second character to watch is Dr. Frankenstein, who is played by Colin Clive. He played an obsessive workaholic and mad scientist, but he never became a caricature. He vacillates between placating his fiancée, that all is well, and being frantic and trying to keep up with all the things that begin to happen that he has no control over. And he is believable as the mad scientist. And the next one to watch is Dr. Pretorius, who is played by Ernest Thesiger. He steals the show in the second movie, in my opinion. And he plays an over-the-top mad scientist who lures Dr. Frankenstein to join him in the creation of this new monster. He plays another mad scientist, but unlike Dr. Frankenstein, Pretorius is more sinister and without any moral compass at all. His performance is great to watch, and for writers, this is a bigger-than-life character, and we can learn a lot about how to showcase Pretorius's wickedness and how it is dripped into the story. So what else can authors learn from watching these movies? After watching both movies, I decided to look into the history, the politics, and the scientific discoveries that were swirling around in the world where Mary Shelley lived. I thought it would be interesting to see what type of historic and scientific soup Mary Shelley grew up in that may have influenced this story. Now, as writers, we are all affected by the world that we live in. So let's take a moment to see what was happening that may have led Mary Shelley to think about a mad scientist creating a monster and playing God as a plot line. Now, she wrote this book in 1818 when she was only 21 years old. This book is noted as an early example of science fiction, which means she wasn't influenced by other authors in an already existing genre. As I watched both movies, I saw scenes that pointed to all of these new changes and inventions that were part of the soup of the 1800s. Great Britain was going through an industrial revolution in manufacturing and transportation with the appearance of steam power. There were changes occurring on a grand scale in every area, both in the United States and in Great Britain. Urbanization, immigration, and technological advances that were changing the way normal people lived and earned a living. At this same time, Romanticism emerged as a dominant artistic and literary movement, while the working class faced harsh conditions and struggled to adapt to all the many changes around them. Some of the changes and inventions were as follows. Humphrey Davy discovered several new elements, including sodium, potassium, calcium, iodine, and several others. He was also credited with the invention of the first electric light. There were many scientists trying to create electric light at this time. John Dalton developed the modern atomic theory. Thomas Young conducted experiments on the wave nature of light. Michael Faraday did work on electricity and magnetism and laid the foundation for modern electrical engineering. He discovered electromagnetic induction and the laws of electrolysis. And there were also improvements in surgical techniques and the invention of new drugs. Electricity was already invented, so to speak, but it was still in a raw state. Several scientists were all trying to invent the first electric light bulb, but it was Thomas Edison who got the patent in 1879. So in 1818, when Mary wrote this book, there was only gas lighting, and the light bulb came to know it didn't arrive for another 50 years. But electricity itself was seen as a raw and powerful force by the scientists on both sides of the Atlantic at this time. And many scientists were all trying to tame electricity in one way or another. So before I researched what was around Mary as she wrote this story, I was fascinated by what an important role electricity played in the experiments in both movies. The laboratory in the windmill got the full Hollywood treatment, and it was bigger than life. But electricity was the core force in the experiment. It was also believable, especially in light of what's going on in science at the time that this was written. This is an example of why it's important to research these things when writing historical novels. With all the changes that were taking place in Mary Shelley's world and the world of her husband and other writers, one can see how the moral tale of playing God and trying to create life could have appeared at this time. Just like in our day when people now fear AI will take over the world. Many people in her day may have feared where all these scientists would take all the changes and the discoveries that were occurring day by day. For the writers out there, when you watch the movies, think about how what is going on in our world could lead you to a science fiction concept to write a story around. Now, what else can writers learn? Both movies are a Gothic movie fan's dream come true. I believe the movies were shot on sets that were built for the story, and there is creativity in every corner of every scene. Every scene has something in it to anchor the story in a historical period in time. And so if you're new to writing, watch the sets to see how they anchor each scene of the story, not only in a certain time frame, but also in a certain place. The next area is the level of drama. Now, there is a lot of high drama, almost melodrama in both movies. Now, I love this kind of stuff. I find it absolutely charming. Watch how the monster is revealed to the movie viewer, 1 inch at a time. The few innocent love scenes were somewhat emotional and dramatic, but they did give Dr. Frankenstein a more human side and some redeemable qualities. And Dr. Pretorius in the second movie brings melodrama to a new level entirely, but I loved it. Now, if you love Gothic and Old World fashion styles, the wedding scene in the movie is a must-see. The bride and bridesmaids' dresses are beautiful, as is the room in the mansion where the bride waits. Absolutely gorgeous. The other area that would be of interest to writers is how they connected and used a flashback to create the concept of the sequel. I'm assuming that the original movie was so popular that they decided to write a sequel because Mary Shelley never wrote a book, Bride of Frankenstein. As a writer, it's interesting to see how the artists connect the two movies. The Bride of Frankenstein starts out with a real-world conversation between Mary Shelley and her husband Percy Shelley and Lord Byron, talking about her book Frankenstein. She tells them there is more of a moral story to tell, and the camera then goes out the window, I believe, and the second story plays out from there. Even though Mary Shelley didn't write the second movie, they acknowledged that this was still, quote, her story, close quote, by this first scene. Also, this one flashback scene is a simple vehicle or technique, but it works. There is a trend, at least in self-publishing, for people to write novels in series. I myself write in series, so it's interesting to watch how the sequels connect themselves to the original story. This one uses the vehicle of an initial flashback. But then you go right into the whole story of the Bride of Frankenstein with no further flashbacks. In my humble opinion, flashbacks are great in small doses. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. I have links to both movies I watched on YouTube, and I'm also going to give the links to another website called justwatch.com, where they watch where all of the movies are streaming. So if it's not on YouTube, you can't find it on YouTube, you can go to justwatch.com and they will have other places that you can find the movies. And if you have any further insights in how these movies would be of interest to writers, please leave comments below. And if you enjoyed this movie review, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. To the right are my 3-book series that are available for purchase on Amazon.com. Most of the books are presently in Kindle Unlimited. If you enjoyed the video or learned anything, I hope you will give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video.